Story 1. This happened in 2019. I was 24 and working late at a marketing firm in downtown Portland, when I decided to take a shortcut through an alley I'd never used before. As I turned the corner, I saw two men loading black trash bags into the trunk of a white van, and one of them locked eyes with me immediately. The alley was narrow, lined with dumpsters and restaurant emergency exits. The only light came from a flickering bulb above a back door about halfway down. I'd been working until almost 11 p.m. on a presentation, and I was exhausted. My usual route to the parking garage added 10 minutes, and I'd noticed this alley earlier in the day. It looked like a straight shot to where I needed to go. The taller one straightened up and stared at me. He was maybe 6'2", wearing a dark jacket and gloves despite the August heat. The other one kept loading bags, but I could see dark liquid dripping from one of them onto the pavement, creating a small puddle. The liquid looked thick, and in the dim light, it had an oily quality to it. My brain told me to turn around and walk away calmly, but my feet had already frozen. I was standing there like an idiot, mouth probably hanging open. "You lost?" the tall one called out. His voice was too casual, too friendly for the situation. Like we were neighbors who'd run into each other at the grocery store. I managed to shake my head and mumble something about taking a wrong turn. My voice came out higher than normal, shaky. The other man stopped what he was doing now, and they were both just standing there, watching me. The van's back doors were still open, and I could see more bags inside. At least 6 or 7, piled on top of each other. I started backing up slowly, not taking my eyes off them. The tall one took a step toward me, then another. "Hold on a second," he said. "You work around here?" His partner moved slightly to the side, and I realized with cold clarity that they were positioning themselves. If I ran, they could cut off both directions. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard it hurt. My purse was on my shoulder, phone inside it, and I couldn't reach for it without making them think I was calling someone. I lied and said I was just passing through, visiting someone in one of the apartments above the shops. I pointed vaguely behind me, like I knew exactly where I was going. The tall one nodded slowly, looking at the other man, then back at me. His partner was younger, maybe early 20s, with a shaved head and tattoos creeping up his neck. He hadn't said a word yet, just stared with this flat expression that was somehow worse than if he'd looked angry. "That's good," the tall one said, "because if you worked around here, we might see you again, and that would be complicated." The way he said complicated made my stomach drop. It wasn't a threat exactly, but it was worse than a threat. It was a promise. An explanation of how things were going to work if I didn't handle this correctly. I turned and walked as fast as I could without running. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold my phone once I pulled it out. Behind me, I heard the van doors slam, then an engine start. The sound of it made me want to sprint, but I forced myself to keep walking at the same pace. Running would confirm I'd seen something I shouldn't have. Walking meant maybe I was just a confused office worker who'd taken a wrong turn. I ducked into a 24-hour convenience store on the corner and stayed there for 20 minutes, watching through the window. The clerk, a kid who couldn't have been older than 19, asked if I was okay. I must have looked terrible. I told him I was fine, just waiting for a friend. The white van drove past twice, once going north, then 10 minutes later going south again. Both times, it slowed down as it passed the store. I called the police once I got home. My hands were still shaking as I dialed. They asked for the license plate, which I didn't have. I'd been too panicked to notice. They asked what was in the bags. I said I didn't know for certain, but the liquid looked dark, maybe red, and there was a smell. I hadn't mentioned the smell before, but I suddenly remembered it's something sweet and metallic that had hit me even from 15 feet away. The officer on the phone went quiet for a moment after I said that. Then he took down my statement very carefully, asking me to repeat certain details. the color of the van, the exact location of the alley, the time, what the men were wearing. He asked if I'd be willing to come in and look at photos. I said yes. They said they'd send a patrol car to check the area immediately. 2 days later, I read a news article about a body found in a dumpster 4 blocks from that alley. The article was short, buried in the local section. A 31-year-old man, identity withheld pending family notification. Discovered by sanitation workers early Tuesday morning. The body had been dismembered and placed in black plastic bags. Police were investigating. The timeline matched. The location matched. I called the police department and asked to speak to the officer who'd taken my statement. They transferred me 3 times before someone told me a detective would call me back. No one ever did. I went to the station in person a week later. Waited for 40 minutes to speak to someone. The detective who finally met with me seemed surprised I was there. He looked at my statement, asked a few questions, then told me they were pursuing multiple leads. When I asked directly if my report was connected to the body they'd found, he said he couldn't comment on ongoing investigation. I switched jobs 3 months later and moved to a different neighborhood. Not just a different apartment, a completely different part of the city across the river. I told myself it was for career opportunities, a better commute, and cheaper rent. But I knew the real reason. Every time I stayed late at work, I thought about that alley. Every white van I saw made my pulse spike. I still think about those men sometimes. About how casual they were, like they'd done this before, like it was routine. About the way the tall one said complicated, like he was discussing a minor inconvenience instead of threatening my life. About how easily I could have been in one of those bags if I'd walked through that alley 5 minutes earlier. If I'd interrupted them mid-dump instead of at the end. If I'd pulled out my phone and taken a picture. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, still loading bags into vans in dark alleys. If that 31-year-old man knew them, or if he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time too. If he fought back, or if it was over before he knew what was happening. I check the news obsessively now. Any mention of bodies found in dumpsters, dismemberments, or unsolved murders in Portland. I haven't seen any others like this. Not sure if that's good or bad. Story 2. This happened in 2021. I was 29 and hiking alone in the Cascade Mountains when I heard screaming coming from somewhere off the main trail. I stopped to listen, and after a few seconds, I heard it again, a woman's voice, desperate and terrified, the kind of scream that doesn't sound like it's coming from a human throat. I'd been on the trail since dawn, doing a 12-mile loop I'd completed at least 20 times before. It was a Wednesday in October, middle of the week, and I'd only seen 2 other hikers all morning. They'd been heading down as I was heading up, an older couple with matching hiking poles who told me the view from the summit was spectacular today. The screaming came at mile 7, in a section where the trail wound through dense forest before climbing up to the ridgeline. Every instinct told me to keep walking, call 911, and let professionals handle it. But the screaming was so raw, so full of panic, that I found myself pushing through the brush toward the sound. I'd heard mountain lions and fake screams before, but this was pure terror. I was maybe 50 yards off the trail when the screaming suddenly stopped. Not gradually, not fading away, just cut off mid-sound, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence was worse than the screaming. I stood there in the trees, listening to nothing but wind in the branches and my own breathing, which sounded way too loud. Then I heard voices. Low, male voices, talking calmly. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was conversational, relaxed. One of them laughed. I crept closer, moving carefully to avoid snapping branches. Years of hiking had taught me how to move quietly through the woods. I use that now, placing each foot deliberately, testing the ground before putting my weight down. Through a gap in the branches, I could see a small clearing about 30 feet across. 3 men stood in the center. One was holding a phone, filming something on the ground that I couldn't see clearly from my angle. Another was coiling up a rope, the kind of thick climbing rope you'd use for rappelling. The third was adjusting something, moving around whatever was on the ground, positioning it. They were all wearing similar clothes, dark pants, hooded sweatshirts, hiking boots. One had a baseball cap pulled low. It looked like normal hikers except for the way they were acting, the careful purposefulness of their movements. The one with the phone did a slow pan across the clearing, stopping to film the trees in different directions. My foot snapped a branch. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. All three of them turned toward the sound instantly, heads swiveling in perfect unison. I pressed myself against a tree, not breathing, praying I was hidden enough by the undergrowth. One of them started walking in my direction. He moved fast but quietly, scanning the forest. Probably just a deer, another one said, but the first guy kept coming. He was maybe 20 feet away when his phone rang, the sound loud and jarring in the quiet forest. He stopped, answered it, and had a brief conversation that I couldn't hear clearly. "We gotta go," he called to the others. Park rangers doing rounds. They grabbed their stuff fast, everything disappearing into backpacks with practiced efficiency. The one with the filming phone did one more sweep with it, a slow 360-degree pan of the clearing, capturing everything. Then they headed down a different trail, one I didn't know existed, disappearing into the trees within seconds. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, counting to 300 in my head before I moved. Then I crept into the clearing, every nerve screaming at me to run the other way. There were scuff marks in the dirt, recent and deep. Bent grass that was still slowly straightening. A water bottle is lying on its side near the edge of the clearing. And one sneaker, a woman's Nike running shoe, size 7 or 8, muddy and worn, the kind someone had owned for years. The shoe had dried blood on it. Not a lot, but enough to be visible in the sunlight that filtered through the trees. I took photos with my phone, hands shaking so badly I had to take each shot 3 times to get one that wasn't blurred. I photographed everything, the scuff marks, the bent grass, the shoe from multiple angles, the water bottle. I used a stick to flip the shoe over. More blood on the inside. Then I ran. Didn't walk, didn't jog, full sprint back to the main trail, branches whipping at my face, roots trying to trip me. I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot, where I stood next to my car, gasping for air, my lungs burning, still holding my phone with the photos on it. I called the police from my car, doors locked, engine running. Gave them everything. The exact GPS coordinates of the clearing, which I'd marked on my hiking app. Descriptions of all 3 men, what they were wearing, and which direction they'd gone. The photos. Everything. The deputy who took my statement met me at the ranger station 20 minutes later. He was professional, thorough, and wrote down every detail. I asked if anyone had reported a missing woman in the area. He said he couldn't share that information, but his face told me the answer was probably yes. I asked what he thought they were doing in that clearing. He said it could be anything: film students making a horror movie, pranksters setting up an elaborate prank, or something else. He didn't sound convinced by his own explanations, and the way he kept looking at the photos of the shoe told me he wasn't treating this like some college project. They sent me home and said they'd investigate immediately. I sat in my apartment that night with every light on, scrolling through local news sites. Nothing. I checked the next day. Nothing. The day after that, still nothing. I called the sheriff's department 3 days later. The deputy I'd spoken to was off duty. I left a message. He called back 2 hours later and said they'd searched the clearing. They found the scuff marks I'd photographed and evidence that multiple people had been there recently. But no shoe. No water bottle. No blood. The clearing had been cleaned. I asked how that was possible. I had photos. He said he believed me, but whatever had been there was gone now. They were still investigating, But without physical evidence, there wasn't much they could do. The descriptions I'd given didn't match anyone in this system. The trail I'd said the men used didn't appear on any maps, and they couldn't find it. I checked the local news every day for 2 weeks. Nothing about missing persons, nothing about bodies found, nothing about arrests. Either the police found nothing, or they found something they weren't making public. That shoe is the image I can't get out of my head. Just sitting there in the dirt, abandoned, blood visible in the afternoon sun. Someone wore that shoe. Someone ran in it, hiked in it, lived a normal life until they didn't anymore. Someone screamed. I never went hiking alone again. I tried once, 3 months later, and made it about a mile before turning back. Every sound made me freeze. Every shadow between the trees looked like a person watching. I joined a hiking group, always go with at least 3 other people now. But I never take that trail anymore. Can't even drive past the trailhead without my hands getting clammy. And I never heard what happened to the woman whose voice I followed into those woods. If she's still alive somewhere, or if that shoe was all that was left to find. Story 3. This happened in 2018. I was 26 and had pulled into a rest stop off I-90 in rural Montana around 2 a.m. during a cross-country drive. The parking lot was nearly empty, just my car, a semi-truck idling near the entrance, and a silver SUV parked near the bathrooms. I'd been driving for 12 hours straight, trying to make it from Seattle to Minneapolis in 2 days. The original plan was to stop at a motel around midnight, but I'd felt wide awake and wanted to put more miles behind me. The rest stop was one of those minimal ones, just bathrooms, vending machines, and a couple of picnic tables. The lights in the parking lot were those orange sodium ones that make everything look sickly and washed out. I was walking back to my car, coffee from the vending machine in hand, when I heard a muffled thumping sound coming from the SUV. I stopped and listened. 3 loud thumps, a pause, then 3 more. Like someone kicking, rhythmic, deliberate. The SUV's windows were tinted dark, darker than legal in most states, and I couldn't see inside even standing right next to it. My first thought was maybe someone had locked their keys in the car and was trying to get out. It happens. Or maybe a dog someone had left while they used the bathroom. But the thumps were too forceful for a dog, too heavy. I walked closer. The thumping got more frantic, losing its rhythm. Then I heard in a voice, female, screaming but muffled, like there was something over her mouth. The SUV started rocking slightly with the impacts. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. My hands were steady, adrenaline doing that weird thing where everything gets really clear and focused. As I was explaining the situation to the dispatcher, the bathroom door opened and a man walked out. He was in his 40s of average height, in a blue jacket and jeans. But he totally froze when he saw me. "Is that your car?" I asked, phone still pressed to my ear. The 911 dispatcher was urging me to step away from the vehicle, get back to my car, and stay on the line. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at me. The thumping from inside the SUV had stopped. The silence was sudden and complete. "Police are on their way," I said, louder than necessary, making sure both he and the dispatcher could hear me clearly. The dispatcher confirmed they had a unit en route, ETA 12 minutes. State police from the next town over. The man's hand moved to his pocket slowly. I started backing toward my car, keeping my eyes on him. "You should mind your own business," he said quietly. His voice was flat, completely emotionless, like he was reading from a script. "You're making a mistake. That's my girlfriend in there. We had a fight. She's drunk and being dramatic." I didn't believe him for a second. Something about the way he said it was wrong, rehearsed. And if someone was locked in your car, even if they were drunk and angry, you'd be trying to calm the situation down, explain it better. You wouldn't just stand there with your hand in your pocket, watching someone call the police with that dead look in your eyes. the semi-truck's engine suddenly roared to life. The driver, watching from his cab, blasted the horn in long, loud bursts that shattered the peaceful night. The sound was deafening, echoing off the bathroom building. The man's attention snapped to the truck, then back to me. I was in my car now. Door open, engine started, phone still connected to 911. He made a decision fast. Ran to the SUV, jumped in, and peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching on the asphalt. I got his license plate and repeated it to the dispatcher 3 times, making sure she had it right. The truck driver had climbed down and was walking over, a big guy in his 50s with a trucker cap and a concerned expression. "You okay?" he asked. "I saw him come out and the way he looked at you, I didn't like it." I nodded, still on the phone with dispatch. The truck driver said he'd wait with me until the police arrived. He'd seen everything, could give a statement. His name was Frank, and he'd been a long-haul driver for 30 years. "Trust your gut," he said. Something was wrong with that whole situation. The police arrived 8 minutes later. 2 state troopers in separate vehicles. I gave them everything plate number, which they ran immediately. Detailed description of the man, what he'd said, what I'd heard. The truck driver, Frank, corroborated everything and added details I'd missed. He'd seen the man loading something into the SUV earlier, before I'd arrived. A large duffel bag or something similar, heavy enough that the man had struggled with it. The troopers put out an alert immediately. One of them called it in while the other took our statements. They were professional, but I could see the urgency in their movements. One of them asked me to describe the sound I'd heard more carefully. The thumping pattern, the muffled scream, how long it had lasted. His partner was on the radio, speaking quickly to someone, using codes I didn't understand. They told me I could go, but to expect a call from a detective. Keep my phone on. Don't leave the state for a few days if possible. They had my information and might need me to come in and look at photos, identify the man. I gave them my route information, where I'd be stopping, and my final destination. Frank walked me to my car, told me to drive safely, and said I'd done the right thing. I drove to the next town and got a motel room. Couldn't keep driving after that, I was shaking too badly. Sitting in my room with the TV blaring, I kept checking my phone. Sleep wouldn't come. All I could hear was that muffled scream and the thumping from the SUV rocking. 3 days later, a detective called me. They'd found the SUV abandoned in a Walmart parking lot in Idaho. It had been wiped clean, no prints, no DNA, nothing. The plates were stolen, taken off a similar vehicle in a parking garage in Spokane 2 weeks earlier. He asked me to describe the man again, which I did. Every detail I could remember. The way he moved, his voice, the dead look in his eyes. The detective said he'd email me some photos to look at, people they were considering as suspects. He never sent the photos. I called the department twice over the next week, left messages. No response. Started to wonder if I'd imagined the conversation. 6 months later, I tried again from a different number. A different detective answered, said he'd look into the case. Called back an hour later and told me the case was still open, but they had no suspects. When I mentioned the photos I was supposed to look at, he said he had no record of that in the file. I think about the woman in that SUV constantly. Whether they found her, whether she's still alive somewhere, whether that man went back to doing what he was doing, found another rest stop, another victim. The detective said the SUV being wiped clean and the plates being stolen suggested someone who'd done this before, who knew how to cover their tracks. I never stop at rest stops alone anymore. If I'm driving cross-country, I plan my stops carefully, only at places with good lighting and multiple people around. I wait until morning, when I can stop at gas stations with convenience stores, places with cameras and witnesses. And every time I see a silver SUV with tinted windows, my heart rate spikes and I find myself checking the license plates, looking for anything suspicious. Frank the truck driver and I kept in touch. He'd check in every few months to see if I'd heard from the cops. The last time we talked, about a year after it happened, he said something that stuck with me. "We did what we could," he said. Sometimes that has to be enough, even when it doesn't feel like it. But it doesn't feel like enough. Because somewhere out there, that man is still driving around. And I can't stop wondering how many times he's done this before. How many women has he put in the back of vehicles? How many rest stops has he used? Whether the police ever really looked for him, or whether they just filed a report and moved on to cases they could actually solve. That night changed how I see the world. Made me understand that horror doesn't just exist in dark alleys and abandoned buildings. It exists in rest stop parking lots off major highways. It exists in the middle of normal life, in places where people stop to use the bathroom and stretch their legs. It exists in plain sight, and most of us drive right past it without ever knowing how close we came to seeing something we couldn't unsee. Support us by subscribing to Spookfeed.